My name is Lilia Sparks. I'm a 32-year-old captain in the United States Army and a single mother to my beautiful 1-year-old daughter, Emma. Life isn't anything like I thought it would be, but in some ways, it's better. A little over a year ago, an unexpected betrayal blew my world apart, leaving me to pick up the pieces alone while preparing to welcome my baby girl. In those first few weeks after Mark left, I felt like I was drowning. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, heard his voice echoing those terrible words. "Look at you, Lilia," he'd sneered, his eyes raking over my changing body with disgust. "You've let yourself go. You used to be a soldier. Now you're just soft. Bloated in your own uniform. Jessica? She still has her fire. She's tight, disciplined. You? You're a whining machine complaining about backaches. Honestly, it's humiliating to be seen with you." He and my best friend thought they had broken me, but they forgot one crucial thing about a soldier. We never leave a comrade behind. And inside of me, a little private was waiting for her orders. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe a mother is the toughest soldier there is. And get ready to hear the story of how I took back my honor. The slam of the front door was a detonation, and in the blast radius, there was only silence. A thick, ringing silence that filled the space where Mark's voice had just been, a void where my world used to be. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there, frozen in the middle of our living room, a statue in olive drab. My ears buzzed with a high-pitched whine, the sound of shock setting in. The only other noise was the tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the corner, each swing of its pendulum a heavy metallic beat. Tick-tock. It sounded like a time bomb, counting down to... what? The final collapse? I looked down at my Army combat uniform, the digital camouflage pattern suddenly feeling like a costume. The fabric felt coarse and foreign against my skin. His words played on a merciless loop inside my head, each syllable a piece of shrapnel. Bloated in your own uniform. Soft. Humiliating. For the first time in my life, the uniform that symbolized my honor, my strength, my entire identity, felt like a shroud of shame. This uniform had carried me through basic training, through officer candidate school, through deployments where the North Carolina heat felt like a cool breeze. It was my armor. But tonight, standing on the battlefield of my own home, it only magnified my defeat. He had seen me at my strongest, covered in mud and sweat, leading my platoon through grueling exercises. And now, he saw me as this, defeated. A soldier who had lost her own territory without a single shot being fired. The quiet, curated life we'd built in this little house just outside Fort Bragg had become an occupied zone. And I was the lone casualty left behind. My legs felt like lead, but some detached part of my brain issued an order, move. I staggered toward the master bathroom, my hand tracing the wall for balance. Maybe cold water, maybe the shock of it on my face would clear the fog, would wash away the filth of his words. The bathroom had always been my sanctuary, the one place where I could shed the rank and the responsibility and just be Lilia. I reached for the chrome faucet, my reflection a pale, blurry shape in the mirror. And then I stopped. My breath hitched in my chest. There, on my hairbrush, resting on the marble countertop, was the evidence. My brush. The one I used every morning. Tangled among my own dark blonde strands were several others. Long, silky, unmistakable strands of platinum blonde hair. Jessica's hair. A wave of nausea, so violent it made my vision swim, rose from the pit of my stomach. It wasn't just that he'd been with her. It was that he'd brought her here, into our home, into my space. They had stood here, in this room, probably laughing. She had likely used my brush, looked at herself in my mirror, her scent lingering in the air long after she was gone. The casual intimacy of it was more brutal than any confession. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was a calculated invasion, a quiet, deliberate act of psychological warfare designed to erase me from my own life. The revulsion was so complete, so absolute, that I had to brace myself against the vanity to keep from collapsing. My knees gave out anyway. I slid down the cool tile of the wall until I was sitting on the floor, my back pressed against the wood of the cabinet. The cold seeped through my uniform pants, a stark contrast to the fire of shame burning in my gut. I wrapped my arms around my belly, a primal protective gesture. And in the suffocating silence, I felt it. A tiny, insistent flutter from within. A gentle kick. It was the only sign of life in a world that had just died. A signal from my little private, my subordinate, my mission. The impulse to call my mom was immediate, a desperate cry for comfort. But I crushed it just as quickly. I couldn't let her hear the fracture in my voice. I couldn't bear for her own heart to break over the phone, hundreds of miles away. She would worry herself sick, and right now, I didn't have the strength to manage anyone else's pain. My fingers, trembling, scrolled through my contacts, past friends, past colleagues, until they landed on a number I had saved as a professional requirement, but never ever thought I would use. The Military Family Support Hotline. I dialed. A voice, calm, steady, and anonymous, answered on the second ring. "You've reached the family support line. How can I help you?" I didn't give my name. I didn't give my rank. I just held the phone to my ear, the cold plastic a small anchor in the darkness. My voice came out as a ragged whisper, barely audible. I don't know what to do next." The voice on the other end didn't push, didn't pry. It just waited, a patient presence in the storm. That calm professional voice became my only lifeline in the long, dark hours that followed. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually the first gray fingers of dawn began to push through the small bathroom window, casting long shadows on the floor. With the light came a change. The paralysis was gone. In its place was the cold, sharp clarity of a soldier assessing a compromised position. I would not stay here. I would not spend another second in a territory that had been so thoroughly defiled. I pushed myself to my feet, my joints aching. I walked into the bedroom and pulled my olive drab duffel bag from the top of the closet. I didn't pack with emotion. I packed with efficiency. Birth certificate, social security card, military IDs, a few sets of loose-fitting civilian clothes, my copy of What to Expect When You're Expecting, its pages dog-eared and worn. Essentials only. Before I walked out, my eyes landed on our wedding photo on the wall by the door. Us, smiling in our dress blues and white gown, the picture of a perfect military couple. I took the frame off its hook. For a moment, I felt the urge to smash it, to watch the glass shatter into 1,000 pieces, just like our life had. But I didn't. Violence was his language, not mine. Instead, I turned the frame over and simply placed it, face down, on the polished hardwood floor. A quiet, final, definitive act. My mission here was over. The order to withdraw had been given. The drive to my mom's house was a blur. I don't remember the traffic on the all-American freeway or the familiar turn onto her quiet, tree-lined street. But I remember the feeling of the tactical retreat being complete. I had established a secure fallback position. Now, sitting in the safety of my childhood bedroom, surrounded by the ghosts of a simpler time, my old high school track trophies collecting dust, a faded Bon Jovi poster still on the wall, I could finally begin the damage assessment. In the military, after every mission, we conduct an after-action review. We analyze what went wrong, identify enemy tactics, and learn. As the shock from the night before began to recede, my training kicked in. The raw, screaming pain was still there, but it was background noise. In its place, a cold, analytical part of my brain took over. I needed to understand the enemy. I needed to map out the invisible bullets that had been hitting me for years. My first piece of intel was Mark's obsession with comparing me to Jessica. It played back in my head now not as casual comments, but as a systematic campaign. "You should learn to relax more, like Jess," he'd say on a Saturday when I was planning our week. "She knows how to just live a little, not be so wound up." The implication was clear. I was rigid. I was no fun. Or the time I bought a simple black dress for a formal military ball. I thought I looked sharp, professional. He'd looked me up and down, a slight frown on his face. "It's a little severe, don't you think?" he'd remarked. A little too Captain Sparks. They weren't suggestions. I see it now. They were strategic strikes against my confidence, designed to plant a seed of doubt that the very core of who I was, a disciplined, focused soldier, was fundamentally unlovable. He was trying to convince me that my strength was a weakness. And then there was Jessica, my supposed ally. The memories of her were now painfully clear, like a photograph brought into sharp focus. I remembered our shopping trips to the Cross Creek Mall. I'd be looking for practical clothes, and she'd steer me toward racks of tight dresses and low-cut tops. "You have to show Mark you're still a woman, not just a captain," she'd said once, holding up a bright red dress that was entirely not me. "Let him know you've still got it." At the time, I thought it was just friendly advice. I felt a lump of shame form in my throat as the truth hit me. She wasn't my ally. She was his. She was reinforcing his narrative, making me the problem that needed fixing. She was subtly validating his complaints that I was too serious, too much of a soldier. She was helping him build the case for my dismissal long before I even knew I was on trial. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the familiar oak tree in my mom's front yard. The anger was a slow, cold burn now, the kind that fuels purpose. I thought back to one summer evening, a backyard barbecue we hosted. The air was thick with the smell of charcoal and cut grass. I was at the grill, flipping burgers and hot dogs with practiced efficiency. Mark, beer in hand, called out to the crowd. "Watch out, everyone. Captain Sparks is running this grilling operation with military precision. Don't you dare put the ketchup in the wrong spot, or she'll have you doing push-ups." Everyone laughed. It was a good-natured, hearty laugh. Even I managed a tight smile, though a small, uncomfortable knot had formed in my stomach. At the time, I dismissed it as him just being goofy. But now, I saw it for what it was. A public performance designed to gently mock my identity. In front of my peers and his, he had reduced my rank, my career, to a punchline about grilling hot dogs. He was trivializing my authority, turning my competence into a joke. It was gaslighting disguised as humor. The most painful realization, the one that felt like a direct hit to the chest, was the memory of Germany. A promotion. A command position at Patch Barracks in Stuttgart. It was a dream assignment, the kind of career move I had been working toward for years. The orders were almost in hand. But Mark had convinced me to turn it down. I could still hear his voice, thick with manufactured emotion. "I can't do long distance, Lilia. I just can't live without you," he'd pleaded. "My contracting business is finally taking off here. We're building a life in Fayetteville." I had chosen him. I had chosen our love. I'd let a career-defining opportunity pass me by because I believed in us. And now, the ugly truth was staring me in the face. It was never about love, it was about control. He didn't want me to outrank him, not just in the military, but in life. He couldn't stand the thought of being the husband of a successful officer in Germany. He needed me here, in Fayetteville, on his turf, where he could slowly, methodically, undermine me. That was enough. The review was over. It was time to write the report. I found an old spiral notebook and a pen on my childhood desk. This wasn't for journaling my feelings. This was an intelligence brief. At the top of the page, I wrote, "Damage Report." Then I drew a line down the middle. On the left, I wrote the header, "Enemy Propaganda." On the right, the truth. Under the left column, I wrote his words, "You're a whining machine." Beside it, on the right, I wrote, "I am growing a human life. My body is performing a miracle of strength." Left column, "You're soft." Right column, "I have completed some of the most rigorous training in the world. I am stronger than he will ever be." Left column, "It's humiliating to be seen with you." Right column, "I am a captain in the United States Army. I wear my uniform with honor. The only humiliation belongs to him, a man who betrayed his wife and abandoned his child." I kept writing, line after line, systematically dismantling every lie with a cold, hard fact. The process didn't magically erase the pain. The wounds were still raw. But for the first time since that door slammed shut, I felt a flicker of power. I was no longer the victim cowering in the dark. I was an intelligence officer, defining the battlefield. This notebook, this list, it was the first brick in the new fortress I would build around myself and my daughter. The fortress of my own damn honor. I had identified the enemy and their tactics. Now, what was the operational plan? The operational plan began, as all military operations do, with establishing a clear chain of command. Chaos thrives in a vacuum of leadership, and I refused to let chaos win. The morning after my damage assessment, I went to the local Walmart and bought a large whiteboard. Back in my childhood room, I mounted it on the wall opposite my bed. This was my new command center. At the top, in bold black marker, I wrote, Mission, Motherhood. Below that, I established my chain of command. I was Commander-in-Chief. My mother, bless her heart, was appointed Logistics Commander in charge of morale and nutrition, a role she accepted with a determined nod and a fresh pot of coffee. My next call was to the base JAG office to schedule an appointment. The lawyer assigned would become my Chief of Legal Operations. With the command structure in place, I laid out the mission objectives. They were clear, concise, and actionable. 1. Secure financial stability. 2. Finalize divorce proceedings. 3. Prepare for Operation Emma. Just seeing the swirling vortex of my pain organized into a neat, numbered list gave me a desperately needed sense of control. I was no longer a victim adrift. I was a commander executing a plan. The first front was financial. I drove to our local USAA branch, the bank that serves military families. The place was calm, orderly. I sat across from a kind-faced bank teller named Brenda and stated my purpose with military professionalism. I need to close a joint checking account and open a new one under my name only. She nodded, her expression neutral, as she typed, Of course. May I ask the reason? My husband and I are separating, I said, my voice even, betraying nothing. But under the desk, my hands were balled into fists so tight my knuckles were white. It was one thing to know it, another to say it out loud to a stranger, to make it official in the cold, hard world of finance. That's when the real horror began. As Brenda pulled up our records, her polite smile faltered. Ma'am, she said gently, there are several recent debts tied to this joint account, a personal loan, and the credit card is maxed out. A cold dread, sharp and sudden, pierced through my carefully constructed composure. I felt a wave of panic threaten to pull me under. He hadn't just left. He had scuttled the ship on his way out. He'd not only taken our savings, but he'd also deliberately chained me to a mountain of debt. For a single, terrifying moment, I couldn't breathe. But then, discipline took over. Panic is a luxury a soldier can't afford. For the next 2 days, my mom and I sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of paper. We went through every bill, every statement. I called each creditor. I didn't cry or plead. I stated the facts, explained the situation, and negotiated payment plans with the same dispassionate tone I'd used to coordinate a supply drop. The next day, I took the diamond necklace Mark had given me for our anniversary to a pawn shop. I watched the jeweler examine it under a loupe without a single pang of regret. This isn't jewelry, I told my mom as I put the cash in my new bank account. It's capital for reconstruction. The next battle was fought on the social front. As an officer's spouse, I was required to attend a monthly gathering for the Family Readiness Group. Walking into the community center on Fort Bragg, I could feel the whispers ripple through the room like a shockwave. I could see the sideways glances, the pitying looks. I kept my chin up and my back straight. Then, Mrs. Gable, the wife of a senior officer and a woman who wielded gossip like a weapon, cornered me by the punch bowl. She placed a hand on my arm, her touch cloying and insincere. Lilia, dear, she said in a stage whisper dripping with false sympathy, I was so sorry to hear you and Mark are having trouble. You know, these military marriages are so difficult. Sometimes we women just have to sacrifice a little more, you know. I looked her directly in the eye. A cold, calm smile touched my lips. Thank you for your concern, Mrs. Gable, I said, my voice clear and steady, loud enough for those nearby to hear. But I believe loyalty is a two-way street. A stunned silence fell over our little group. Mrs. Gable's jaw tightened, and she quickly retreated. It was a small victory, but it was mine. I had held my ground. The final and most important front was internal. My mind had become a hostile environment, replaying Mark's insults on a loop. I knew this was my most dangerous enemy. So I began a new training regimen. Every morning, the alarm went off at 0500 hours. I'd put on my running shoes and walk the quiet suburban streets as the sun came up. I didn't listen to music. I listened to recordings of General Patton's speeches. I listened to lectures on Stoic philosophy. I was conditioning my mind, turning my pain into fuel. I stopped trying to push Mark's words away. Instead, I confronted them head-on. As I walked, I'd let his voice echo in my head. "You're soft." And I would answer it, my own voice a low, fierce murmur under my breath. "Soft? Look at me. I'm carrying a child, navigating a financial minefield, and holding my head high while the world watches. That isn't softness, that's forged steel." It was a slow, grueling process. Building this new armor for my soul was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Harder than any ruck march, harder than any field exercise. But with every step I took in the pre-dawn darkness, I felt a piece of myself coming back into alignment. I was a soldier. And soldiers don't break. We adapt. We overcome. If you've ever had to build yourself back up from nothing, type "I am a warrior" in the comments below. Give this a like if you believe in the power of discipline, because what happened next required a whole new level of strength. After the chill of the family readiness group meeting, I had reinforced my armor, expecting to fight this war alone. I believed strength was a solitary endeavor. But a few days later, a quiet knock on my mother's front door proved me wrong. I opened it to find Sergeant Miller, one of the best NCOs in my company, standing on the porch. He wasn't in uniform, just wearing jeans and a polo shirt. In his hands, he held a dozen Krispy Kreme donuts in their classic white and green box, the iconic Fayetteville treat. He stood at a perfect parade rest, his gaze respectful and direct. "Ma'am," he said, his voice the same steady baritone I'd heard on countless training exercises. "Just wanted to make sure you were okay. The platoon sends its regards." I was momentarily speechless. I had expected questions, pity, or worse, awkward silence. But Miller offered none of that. He didn't mention Mark. He didn't ask a single prying question. He just showed up, a soldier checking on his CO. He was offering loyalty, pure and simple. It was a quiet act of solidarity that spoke louder than 1,000 words of comfort. "Thank you, Sergeant," I finally managed, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. "That means a lot. Come on in." He just shook his head, a small smile on his face. "No, ma'am. Just wanted to drop these off. You take care of yourself." And with that, he was gone. I stood in the doorway holding the box of warm donuts, feeling the first crack in the icy wall I'd built around my heart. A week later, another reinforcement arrived from an even more unexpected place. I was at Womack Army Medical Center for a routine prenatal checkup. The waiting room a familiar sea of camouflage uniforms and anxious families. I sat down next to an older gentleman, his face deeply lined and his eyes holding a quiet wisdom. He wore a worn Vietnam veteran baseball cap. He glanced at my uniform, then at my swollen belly, and a gentle smile touched his lips. We started talking, the easy conversation of two strangers who share a common language. In a moment of vulnerability I still don't quite understand, I found myself telling him a sanitized version of my story. A difficult separation, the challenge of facing motherhood alone. He listened without interruption, his gaze never leaving mine. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Daughter, in a war, the worst thing isn't the enemy's bullet. It's the betrayal of a brother in arms. But you listen to me. A good soldier is never defined by one lost battle, but by how they get up and continue the fight. Your mission now," he said, nodding toward my belly, "is the most important one you will ever have. Don't you let anyone tell you different." I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear that, to have my new reality validated by someone who understood the language of duty. I never got his name, but his words became a permanent part of my arsenal. While I was finding support in unexpected places, my mother was mobilizing her own troops. My mom, a practical Southern woman, knew I didn't need pity. I needed a support system. She secretly got on the phone with a few of her closest friends and some of the more seasoned, no-nonsense army wives she trusted. The next Saturday, I walked into the living room to find it filled with these incredible women. It was a surprise baby shower, but not the kind with silly games and pastel ribbons. This was a logistical operation. On the coffee table were stacks of frozen, home-cooked meals, casseroles, lasagnas, soups, each labeled with heating instructions. There was a mountain of diapers and wipes and gift cards to Target and Walmart. Best of all, they handed me a calendar, a sign-up sheet with names and numbers, a rotating schedule of women offering to babysit so I could get a few hours of sleep or just take a shower in peace once the baby arrived. It was love, expressed not in platitudes, but in practical, life-saving action. I was so overwhelmed with gratitude that I finally, truly cried. Not tears of pain, but tears of relief. The final reinforcement came late one evening, a complete and total surprise. My older sister Sarah and I had been distant for years. Our lives had gone in completely different directions. She was a free-spirited artist living in Asheville, and I was the structured soldier. We loved each other, but we didn't really understand each other. But that night, her beat-up Subaru pulled into the driveway. She had driven 5 hours without calling. She walked in, took one look at my tired face and my big belly, and simply opened her arms. There were no apologies for the years of infrequent calls, no grand speeches. She just hugged me tight and whispered, "You're not in this fight alone. I'm here." That night, we sat on the floor of my room, surrounded by baby clothes, folding tiny onesies, and matching even tinier socks. We didn't talk about Mark or the betrayal. We just worked, side by side, the quiet shared task, mending the frayed edges of our own relationship. In the comfortable silence, I realized that support doesn't always come from where you expect it. Sometimes it shows up on your doorstep after a 5-hour drive, ready to help you fold laundry for a battle you thought you had to face all by yourself. With my new support unit in place, I thought I was ready for anything. I was wrong. With my new support unit in place, I had allowed myself a brief moment of peace. I thought I had secured my perimeter, that I was ready for anything. I was wrong. The first barrage came not from a direction I was watching, but from the one place I couldn't defend: the court of public opinion. It was a Tuesday morning. My sister Sarah, who was still staying with me, walked into the kitchen with a grim look on her face, her phone in her hand. "Lilia, you need to see this." She showed me a Facebook post from Mark. It was long, eloquent, and sickeningly manipulative. He never used my name, but he didn't have to. He wrote about the heartbreak of a difficult marriage, about trying his best to support a wife struggling with the psychological shifts of pregnancy. He painted a picture of himself as a devoted husband, tragically pushed away and forced to seek solace elsewhere. The post was filled with comments from people who didn't know the truth, offering him sympathy. "Stay strong, brother. Her hormones are probably out of control. You did all you could." The post ended with the ultimate sanctimonious flourish. "I just pray she finds her peace." I read every word, and the air left my lungs. It felt like being suffocated. He hadn't just betrayed me, now he was trying to steal my story. He was taking my pain, twisting it, and wearing it as a badge of honor for his own public redemption. He was gaslighting an audience of hundreds, painting me as unhinged and himself as the noble, suffering victim. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. How dare he? The second wave of attack came a few days later. My phone buzzed with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was Jessica. Her voice was a pathetic, watery sob. "Lilia, I am so sorry," she wept into the phone. "I made a terrible mistake. I was so lonely. And Mark, he was too. We just found each other in a moment of weakness." She took no real ownership. Instead, she spun a tragic tale of two poor, lost souls who had tragically fallen into each other's arms. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. Then came the real purpose of her call. But I see now that he still loves you, Lilia. Can't you find it in your heart to give him another chance? For the baby? I listened to the entire charade in dead silence. The woman who had encouraged me to change myself for him, who had helped lay the groundwork for my own destruction, was now asking me to sacrifice myself again for his benefit. The memory of the Vietnam vet's words echoed in my mind. The worst thing isn't the enemy's bullet, it's the betrayal of a brother in arms. When she finally paused for breath, my voice was unnaturally calm. Jessica, your apology isn't for me. It's for whatever is left of your conscience. Don't call me again. I hung up before she could respond, my hands steady but my heart hammering against my ribs. A manipulator never apologizes. They just change their tactics. The final full-scale assault arrived by certified mail a week later. It was a thick envelope from a law firm in downtown Fayetteville. My hands trembled as I tore it open. It was an official letter from Mark's attorney, a legal ultimatum. The demands were so brazen, so utterly contemptuous, that I had to read them twice. He was demanding the right to be in the delivery room. He was demanding 50-50 shared custody of our daughter. And the masterstroke, he was demanding that I be ordered to attend mandatory psychological counseling to prove my emotional stability as a mother. I sank onto the edge of my bed, the papers shaking in my hand. He was using the very narrative he had created, the story of the unstable pregnant woman, as a legal weapon against me. This wasn't about our daughter. This was about power. It was a coordinated, three-front war. Public opinion, emotional manipulation, and now, legal intimidation. He was trying to exhaust me, to bleed me dry emotionally and financially, until I had no choice but to surrender. And for a terrifying moment, it almost worked. The weight of it all felt crushing. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stood in the bathroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror. I saw a tired, pregnant woman with dark circles under her eyes. The echo of Mark's voice returned, whispering its poison. Soft, bloated, humiliating. I looked at the curve of my belly, the new lines on my body, the exhaustion etched onto my face. But this time, something was different. I leaned closer to the mirror, looking past the fatigue, deep into my own eyes, and I saw it. A flicker of light in the darkness. The pilot light of a soldier's spirit that had never been fully extinguished. The same fire that had gotten me through scorching marches and sleepless nights in the field. It was still there. I placed a hand protectively over my stomach, over the tiny life that depended on me entirely. I looked my reflection dead in the eye, and I made a vow. Not to myself, but to her. They will not win, I whispered, my voice low and fierce. I promise you, Emma, they will not define us. They will not write our story. We will write it ourselves. It wasn't a comforting mantra anymore. It wasn't a hopeful prayer. It was a battlefield commission, a declaration of war. My vow in the mirror was a declaration of war, but a soldier knows you don't charge blindly into battle. You wait, you watch, you choose your ground. As it turned out, I didn't have to wait long. The enemy brought the battle directly to me. It was a Saturday afternoon, the busiest time of the week at the Fort Bragg PX. The massive post exchange was a universe of its own, buzzing with the controlled chaos of soldiers and their families. I was deep in the baby section, an aisle of pastel colors and soft textures that felt alien to my world of olive drab. My mind was focused on logistics, comparing the folding mechanisms of strollers when I heard his voice cut through the background noise. Lilia! I froze, my hand hovering over a travel system. The sound of his voice, once a comfort, now triggered a full-body alert. I turned slowly. It was Mark, and he wasn't alone. My blood ran cold as I took in the scene. Flanking him was Jessica, looking angelic in a yellow sundress. And walking beside them, deep in a friendly conversation with Mark, were my commanding officer, Colonel Johnson, and his wife. My mind processed the tactical situation in a split second. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a planned ambush. A public performance designed for maximum impact. Mark had engineered this encounter to put me on the spot, to perform his victim act in front of the one man who held significant power over my career. He approached, his face a perfect mask of feigned concern that made my stomach churn. Lilia, honey, I've been so worried about you, he said, his voice loud enough for the Johnsons to hear clearly. You haven't been answering my texts. He reached for my arm, and I instinctively pulled back, a small, sharp movement of rejection. Colonel Johnson's polite smile tightened as he registered the tension. This was exactly what Mark wanted, to make me look reactive. Before I could formulate a response, Mark turned to my CO, his expression shifting to one of profound sadness. Sir, he began, shaking his head as if burdened by a great weight. I'm just so worried about my wife. She's going through a lot. She won't let me be involved in the preparations for our daughter. Jessica, on cue, stepped forward, her eyes glistening with unshed, manufactured tears. We just want to help, sir, she said, her voice trembling delicately. Lilia is under so much stress, and we're afraid she's pushing everyone who cares about her away. I could feel the energy in the aisle shift. The eyes of people nearby were turning toward us. I could hear the silent judgments forming. They were painting their picture with brutal efficiency. Mark, the caring, rejected husband. Jessica, the concerned friend. And me, the unstable, irrational pregnant woman. The narrative from his Facebook post, brought to life. I felt a surge of white-hot rage, but beneath it, the cold, clear memory of my promise to my daughter echoed. They will not write our story. I took a slow, deliberate breath, letting it out evenly. The time for dignified silence was over. That was a peacetime strategy. This was war. I turned my body to directly face Colonel Johnson, giving him my full attention, my posture shifting into the respectful but confident stance of an officer addressing a superior. I looked past Mark and Jessica as if they were background scenery. Colonel Johnson, sir, I began, my voice perfectly level and calm. The contrast with their high-strung emotional display was immediate. I appreciate your concern. However, I need to clarify that this situation is not a marital issue. I let the words hang in the air for a moment. This is a matter of honor and loyalty. Then I turned my head slowly, my eyes locking on to Mark's. His faux concerned expression faltered. My voice dropped, losing all warmth, becoming as cold and hard as steel. You want to be involved? I asked, my tone laced with contempt. You deserted your post, Mark. You abandoned your unit at the most critical time. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the onlookers. The language I was using was deliberate, a dialect every person in that building understood. It was our language. Mark's face paled. He opened his mouth to sputter a defense, but I cut him off, my voice rising just enough to command the space. You want to help? I continued, my gaze flicking to Jessica, who flinched as if struck. You and she conspired. You launched a coordinated attack on a vulnerable target. In the army, what do we call that? Oh, that's right. An act of cowardice. I held Jessica's gaze until she looked away, her face burning. Then I turned my full attention back to Mark. The families pushing shopping carts had stopped. The soldiers browsing the electronics section were watching. I had their complete attention. This was my ground now. You have no right to speak about my daughter, I said, articulating each word with razor-sharp precision. You forfeited that right when you abandoned your duty. This public harassment ends now. If you continue to contact me, my next stop will be the JAG office to file for a military protective order. I took one step closer, closing the distance between us until he had to meet my gaze. My voice dropped to a low, dangerous growl. Are we clear, sir? The loaded, sarcastic honorific landed like a punch to the gut. The silence in that section of the PX was absolute. Mark stood there, speechless, his manipulative gambit blown to pieces. He was exposed for what he was, not a concerned husband, but a coward and a traitor to the codes we lived by. Colonel Johnson's face was an unreadable mask of military professionalism, but his wife was staring at Mark with an expression of pure disgust. Mark didn't answer. He just gave a pathetic, defeated nod, turned with Jessica scurrying after him, and they disappeared into the crowd. I stood there for a moment, my heart pounding, the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I had taken their ambush and turned it into my counter-offensive. I had used their stage to tell the truth. The first public battle was won. Now, it was time to plan the war. If you've ever had a moment where you finally stood up for yourself and spoke your truth, hit that like button. And let me know in the comments what your personal battle cry would be, that one phrase you'd say to take your power back. The fallout from the PX confrontation was immediate. The very next morning, I received a quiet, unofficial call from Colonel Johnson's assistant, asking me to come by his office after hours. He didn't mention the scene at the PX, but he gave me a name and a phone number written on a slip of paper. Brenda Russo, he said. Best damn divorce attorney in Fayetteville. Specializes in military cases. Tell her I sent you. It was a discreet act of support from my commander, a clear signal that he had seen through Mark's performance. The first public battle was won, and it had yielded a powerful new ally. My first meeting with Brenda was a three-way conference call with the JAG lawyer. I laid out the entire situation, from the initial betrayal to the financial sabotage to Mark's legal ultimatum. I presented the facts with the precision of a mission briefing. Brenda, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 50s, listened intently. When I finished, a grim smile touched her lips. Captain Sparks, she said, her voice like gravel, they made a critical error. They cornered a soldier. And soldiers, when cornered, fight back. From this moment on, we are no longer on the defensive. We are going on the offensive. That single statement shifted the entire dynamic. The fear and anxiety that had been clinging to me began to evaporate, replaced by a focused, tactical calm. Back in my command center, my childhood bedroom, I erased my old whiteboard and drew up a new one. Campaign map. Under Brenda's guidance, our objective was clear. We need to prove three things, she had instructed. 1. He is financially irresponsible. 2. He has a pattern of immoral conduct. And 3. He has willingly abdicated his role as a father. Your word isn't enough. We need an arsenal of evidence. So I began to gather intelligence. For days, I lived and breathed documents. I compiled bank statements showing the drained savings account and the maxed-out credit cards. I printed out old emails and text messages, the ones I had once found merely annoying, but now saw as clear evidence of his manipulative gaslighting. I made a discreet call to Sergeant Miller, who was more than willing to gather signed statements from the soldiers who had witnessed Mark's public harassment at the PX. Each document, each statement, was another round of ammunition. The nights were for study. I started reading about high-profile divorce cases, about legal strategy. I found myself drawn to the writings and dissents of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Her tenacity, her unwavering belief in using the law as a tool for justice, became a source of inspiration. She had fought her battles with intellect and preparation, not just passion. I would do the same. The game-changing discovery came from the most mundane of places. A dusty cardboard box in my mom's garage labeled Mark's Old Stuff. Inside, amongst old college textbooks and forgotten gadgets, was his old laptop. He had abandoned it when he got a new one last year. My first instinct was to leave it alone, to not sink to his level. But Brenda's voice echoed in my head. Every piece of information has value, Captain. I took the laptop to the IT specialist at Brenda's law firm. 2 days later, I got a call. You need to come in, Brenda said, her voice tight with something I couldn't quite identify. What their specialist had found was a treasure trove of deceit. It wasn't just the trove of nauseatingly sweet emails between him and Jessica, dating back months before he left. It was a whole other folder of emails with another woman from 2 years prior. It proved what I now suspected. Mark's infidelity wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a pattern, a habit. But that wasn't the bombshell. The real discovery was in his work files. Mark, the successful civilian contractor, had been systematically overbilling the Army on his construction contracts, submitting invoices for high-grade materials while using cheaper substitutes. The laptop contained spreadsheets, emails to suppliers, and detailed plans that laid out the entire fraudulent scheme. This wasn't just about him being a bad husband, it was about him being a criminal. With our arsenal locked and loaded, Brenda prepared me for the final phase, psychological warfare. In court, their lawyer is going to try to get a reaction out of you, she warned me over coffee. He'll poke at your deepest wounds. He'll twist your words. He'll try to make you angry, make you cry, anything to prove their narrative that you are emotionally unstable. Your mission on that stand is to be a soldier, cool, precise, and factual. You answer only the question that is asked. You do not volunteer information. You do not show emotion. You are a professional. So, I began to train. Every night after my mom went to bed, I would stand in front of the bathroom mirror. She had agreed to help, playing the role of Mark's hostile attorney. She would read from a list of cruel, probing questions we had prepared. Captain Sparks, isn't it true you were resentful of your husband's success? Isn't it a fact that the stress of your career made you cold and distant? Isn't it possible that your pregnancy hormones made you paranoid? The first few times the questions hit me like physical blows. My voice would shake, tears would well up in my eyes. But night after night, I practiced. I learned to separate the emotional sting from the factual basis of the question. I trained myself to hear the words without feeling them. I built a firewall between my heart and my head. I was turning my pain, my humiliation, my rage, into an impenetrable suit of armor. By the end of the week, I could stand there, looking at my own reflection, and listen to the most vicious accusations without flinching. My answers were short, calm, and unshakably firm. The preparation was complete. All that was left was the battle itself. The day of the hearing arrived. D-Day. I walked into the Cumberland County Courthouse not in civilian clothes, but in my full Army service uniform. The perfectly pressed green jacket, the polished brass, the ribbons on my chest. It wasn't a costume. It was my armor. And this courthouse was the battlefield. I sat beside Brenda at our table, my back ramrod straight, my eyes fixed forward. Across the room, Mark and his lawyer were laughing quietly, confident. They saw this as a simple domestic dispute they could win by painting me as an emotional wreck. They had no idea they were walking into a kill zone. The hearing began just as Brenda had predicted. Mark's lawyer, a slick man named Peterson, spent his opening remarks trying to paint a picture of me as a controlling and cold career woman, too obsessed with her rank to be a loving wife. He brought up my rigorous physical training schedule while pregnant, twisting my discipline into a sign of obsession. He mentioned my unwillingness to communicate, reframing my silence in the face of betrayal as emotional instability. Through it all, I followed Brenda's orders. I remained perfectly still, my expression neutral. I didn't fidget, I didn't react. I just listened, my training from those long nights in front of the mirror holding firm. My lack of emotional response seemed to frustrate Peterson, which was exactly the point. Then he called his first witness, Jessica. She walked to the stand, dressed in a conservative navy blue dress, the picture of a reluctant but responsible witness. She recounted their rehearsed story, her voice soft and sorrowful. She spoke of my increasing paranoia during the pregnancy, how I would shut down for days, and how she and poor Mark were just so worried about me. When it was Brenda's turn to cross-examine, she approached the stand with a calm, almost gentle demeanor. "Ms. Albright," she began, "you've painted a very sad picture. You testified that you and Mr. Sparks only found comfort in each other after he was, as you say, pushed out of his home. Is that correct?" "Yes," Jessica whispered, dabbing at a dry eye. "It was a terrible mistake, born of loneliness." Brenda nodded sympathetically. Then she placed a document on the witness stand. "Then perhaps you can explain this," she said, her voice hardening just a fraction. "It's a hotel receipt from the Holiday Inn on Skibo Road, for 2 guests, under your name, dated 1 full month before Mr. Sparks left his home." Jessica's face went white. She stared at the paper as if it were a snake. I don't remember that." Brenda didn't pause. She produced another document. "Perhaps you remember this, a dinner receipt for 2 at Luigi's Italian restaurant. Or these text messages where you and Mr. Sparks discuss how you can't wait to finally be together once he deals with the Lilia situation." Document after document, question after question. Brenda's voice was relentless, a staccato rhythm of facts and evidence. Under the onslaught, Jessica's carefully constructed performance crumbled. She started to stammer, to contradict herself. Her story changed from moment to moment. "He told me she was crazy," she finally blurted out, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "He said their marriage was over long before I came along. It was his idea." She dissolved into genuine, ugly sobs, her betrayal of Mark as complete as her betrayal of me had been. She had just committed perjury and single-handedly destroyed Mark's entire case. Brenda returned to our table, her face impassive. "Witness is all yours," she said quietly to Peterson, who just shook his head in disgust. Next, Mark took the stand. He tried to recover, playing the part of the dignified man betrayed by everyone. He spoke of his love for his unborn child and his fear for my mental state. He was smooth, believable even. Then Brenda rose to her feet, holding a thick stack of printed emails. The air in the courtroom crackled with tension. "Mr. Sparks," she said, her voice dangerously quiet, "do you recognize these documents?" She placed the stack in front of him. It was the evidence from his old laptop. He glanced at the top page and froze. He knew exactly what they were. "These are your business records, are they not?" Brenda pressed. "Specifically, your material invoices for government contracts here at Fort Bragg. Can you explain why you were billing the Army for high-grade copper wiring, but your supplier emails confirm you were installing cheaper aluminum core wiring?" A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Mark was speechless, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. His lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection. Relevance." "It is entirely relevant, Your Honor," Brenda countered smoothly. "Mr. Sparks is attempting to paint himself as a responsible, upstanding member of the community who deserves 50-50 custody. This evidence proves he is a fraud who actively stole from the United States Army. It speaks directly to his character and fitness as a parent." "Objection overruled," the judge said, his eyes now fixed on Mark with undisguised contempt. Brenda turned back to the judge, her voice ringing with authority. "Your Honor, what we have here is a clear pattern. A pattern of systematic infidelity, of financial abuse against his pregnant wife, of professional fraud, and a complete and total abandonment of his responsibilities as a husband and father. My client's requests are simple: sole legal and physical custody of her daughter and a permanent restraining order. He has proven he is a danger not only to her financial and emotional well-being, but also to the very integrity of the community he claims to be a part of." The room was utterly silent. Mark's lawyer tried to object again, but he had nothing left to fight with. The judge, a retired Army colonel himself, looked down at Mark from the bench, his face a thundercloud. He didn't need to deliberate. After reviewing the evidence presented, the judge said, his voice booming through the silent room, "This court finds entirely in favor of the petitioner, Captain Lilia Sparks. He granted every single one of our requests: sole custody, the restraining order, everything. Bang." The sound of the gavel was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It was the sound of a war ending. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumph. I just felt the colossal weight that had been sitting on my shoulders for months suddenly, miraculously, lift. I closed my eyes and took the first deep, truly free breath I had taken in a very long time. It was over. The relief I felt when the judge's gavel fell wasn't joy. It was a sudden, unnerving silence after a long bombardment. My mom and sister hugged me outside the courtroom, their faces beaming with pride and victory. They wanted to go out for a celebratory lunch, but I just shook my head. I didn't have it in me. The war was over, but my body was still braced for impact. When we got back to Mom's house, I didn't say a word. I just walked straight to my room, closed the door, and fell onto the bed. I slept for 14 hours straight, a deep, dreamless, and utterly exhausted sleep. When I finally woke up, the late afternoon sun was streaming through the window. For a moment, I felt nothing. Not happiness, not anger, not even sadness. Just a profound, hollow emptiness. The war had been my entire focus for so long. Every waking moment had been dedicated to planning, preparing, and fighting. Now that it was over, there was just quiet. I finally understood that victory in a war like this doesn't feel like a celebration. It just feels like the end of pain. And in the silence that follows, you have to figure out who you are without the fight to define you. There was a quiet grief in that, a mourning for the life I thought I would have, for the person I was before the battle began. A few days later, while scrolling through my emails, I saw a name that made my stomach clench. Eleanor Sparks, Mark's mother. I almost deleted it without opening, but some impulse made me click. The email was short, just a few lines. Lilia, I've heard about what happened in court. There are no excuses for what Mark has done. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for the extra pain I caused you. I was wrong to blindly believe my son. I wish you and the baby nothing but the best. I read it over and over. It didn't change anything. It didn't erase the hurtful things she had said to me, the blame she had placed on my shoulders in the beginning. But it was an acknowledgement, a surrender. It was the confirmation I didn't know I needed, that I wasn't crazy, that the injustice was real. I sat there for a long moment, then I dragged the email to the trash folder and emptied it. Some doors just need to be closed and locked for good. I didn't need her validation to move forward anymore. The final ghost of the past appeared a few weeks before my due date. I was at the coffee scene downtown, treating myself to a decaf latte and trying to finish a book when the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I looked up and saw him standing there. Mark. He looked diminished. He had lost weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes that made him look 10 years older. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a weary hesitation. He wasn't the monster from my memory anymore. He was just a sad, broken man. He didn't approach my table, just stood a few feet away, as if held back by the invisible line of the restraining order. I know I'm not supposed to be here, he said, his voice quiet, raspy. I'll leave, I had to say it. I'm sorry, Lilia. For everything. There was no manipulation in his voice this time, no hidden agenda, just the flat, empty sound of defeat. I looked at the man I had once loved, the man I had planned a future with, the man who had shattered my world, and I felt nothing. Just a vast, calm distance. The rage was gone, the pain had faded. He was a stranger. I accept your apology, Mark, I said, and the words felt true. Not for you, for me. I need to move on. I gathered my things, my movements slow and deliberate. I wish you the best. I stood up, walked past him without another glance, and left him standing alone in the middle of the coffee shop, a relic of a war that was already over. Forgiving him wasn't about letting him off the hook. It was about me letting go of the anchor that was holding me to the past. It was my final act of liberation. That night, I walked into my room and stood before the whiteboard, my campaign map. It was covered in black and red ink. Objectives, timelines, enemy weaknesses, my own strengths. It was the architecture of my survival, the blueprint of my war. I picked up the eraser. With slow, sweeping motions, I wiped it all away. The legal strategies, the lists of evidence, the names of my enemies. I kept wiping until the board was a perfect, pristine, empty white. The battle was over. The battlefield was cleared. It was time for a full and total disarmament. My campaign against Mark and Jessica was finished. But my life's most important mission was just beginning. I uncapped a new blue marker. In the center of the clean white space, I wrote a single, new heading. Operation Emma. Commence. The real peace wasn't in the judge's verdict or in Mark's apology. It was here, in this quiet room, in the simple act of laying down my weapons and turning my face toward the future, a future that was waiting to be born. Operation Emma commenced on a rainy Tuesday in March, my D-Day. When the first contractions began, there was no panic. The soldier in me took over. I timed them, breathed through them, applying the same calm focus I'd used to navigate a minefield. My mom and sister, my loyal support unit, were right there with me, a steady presence in the storm. The labor was long and grueling, a marathon of pain and endurance that tested every limit I had. But I approached it not as a patient, but as a soldier on her final, most critical mission objective. And then, at 3:14 in the morning, she was here. The moment I heard her first cry, a strong, clear, furious sound, the world shifted on its axis. The nurse placed her on my chest, this tiny 7-pound miracle, and every memory of pain, every ghost of betrayal, every ounce of anger and humiliation simply dissolved. It evaporated into the sterile air of the hospital room, replaced by a love so pure, so overwhelming, it felt like the sun rising inside of me. I held my daughter, my Emma, and I knew in that instant that this love was powerful enough to heal any wound, to rebuild any fortress, to win any war. Those first few weeks were a beautiful, chaotic blur of sleepless nights and endless diaper changes. I was operating on pure adrenaline and instinct. I tried to apply a soldier's order to the beautiful mess of new motherhood. I created feeding schedules and sleep charts. But Emma, my new commanding officer, had her own ideas. She taught me that some missions require flexibility, that strength isn't always about rigidity. She taught me the quiet power of a gentle touch, the strategic importance of a lullaby. One night, rocking her to sleep in the quiet dark of her nursery, I looked down at her perfect, peaceful face, her tiny hand curled around my finger. Mark's words came back to me, not as a painful echo, but as a distant, ridiculous lie. Soft. Bloated. He was so wrong. I wasn't soft. I was a sanctuary. I wasn't bloated. I was a wellspring of life. I wasn't weak. I was a protector, a guardian, a fortress. I finally understood that love isn't a weakness. It's the ultimate form of strength. Life found its rhythm. The late-night feedings, where the only sound was her soft breathing and the hum of the refrigerator. Her first real smile, a gummy, glorious grin that felt more rewarding than any medal. The day she rolled over for the first time, a small victory we celebrated with cheers and applause. The long walks around the neighborhood, her in the stroller, me pointing out the dogs and the flowers. Her first word, a happy little Dada, aimed at a picture of my own father on the mantelpiece. A moment that made my heart both ache and soar. When Emma was 6 months old, I knew I couldn't just keep this healing to myself. I had been given a gift, a second chance, and I had a duty to share it. I started a small informal support group on base. We met once a week in a quiet room at the community center. I called it Emma's Circle. It was a safe harbor for other military spouses, single parents, and anyone who felt adrift in the unique, often lonely, sea of military life. I never told my full story in detail. I didn't have to. My strength, my peace, my quiet confidence, they spoke for themselves. I just listened, offered support, and shared the most important lesson I had learned: that your worth is not determined by your relationship status or the opinion of others. It's forged in the fires you walk through and the love you build from the ashes. Which brings us back to today. It's a perfect North Carolina afternoon, a year later. Emma and I are at a park just off post. The sun is warm on my skin, and the air is filled with the sound of children laughing and the distant familiar roar of a C-130 flying overhead. Emma, now a fearless 1-year-old, is toddling across the bright green grass on unsteady legs, her face a picture of pure, unadulterated joy. She stumbles, falls onto her padded little bottom, looks at me with wide eyes, and then bursts into a fit of giggles before pushing herself back up to try again. I sit on a park bench, watching her. In this moment, Mark and Jessica are less than ghosts. They are nothing. They are irrelevant data from a mission debrief that happened a lifetime ago. My victory wasn't the day they were exposed in court. It wasn't the day the judge's gavel fell. My victory is this. This quiet, ordinary, magnificent moment. The warmth of the sun, the sound of my daughter's laughter, and a profound, unshakable peace in my own soul. I was a captain who was betrayed. I was a soldier who was abandoned. I was a woman who was told she was worthless, but I was never, for 1 second, defeated. I completed the hardest mission of my life. I came home. Thank you for listening to my story. My war on that front is over, but I know many of you are fighting your own battles every single day, in ways big and small. Remember that your greatest victory won't be in the courtroom or in the fight. It will be in the quiet moments of peace you build for yourself afterwards. In the comments, I'd be honored if you would share what your Operation Emma is, that one person or goal that gives you the strength to keep fighting. Please like this video and subscribe for more stories of strength and survival. Stay strong.